A dead boy has been hunting me down my whole life. On my 18th birthday, I finally understand why. I've always been bound to death. On my 8th birthday, a shadow strode into my house and shot me and my family dead. I remember it vividly. Every detail, every angle, etched and stained and carved into my memory. I sat very still with my knees to my chest, my gaze glued to my siblings. Lily and PJ looked like they were sleeping, and I could almost believe it. I didn't look at the shadow. From the comfort of my knees, I waited for my brother to lift his head. But his body was so limp, so still, every part of him faltering. My sister's head was nestled in his shoulder, thick beads of red running down her face. They're just sleeping. I could tell myself they were, as long as I didn't look at the splatter of scarlet staining the back of the couch and pooling at their feet. Bang! Mom's body dropped onto the ground. I lunged forward, slamming my hands over my ears. Bang! PJ's head slumped forwards, a teasing smile still frozen on his lips. Bang! Lily gently tipped into PJ like she was going to sleep. Before she closed her eyes, Mom told me to run. I can't remember how long I stayed under the shattered remnants of Mom's favorite table. The shadow was waiting for me to move, to make a noise. I watched booted feet crunch through glass, getting closer and closer, and slowly, fight or flight began to take over. Making it halfway across the living room, my palms slick with my mother's blood, I thought I was going to live. Cruel fingers wound their way through my hair and shoved me to my knees. I remember the phantom legs of a spider creeping down the back of my neck when the shadow with no face dragged the barrel of his gun down my spine. Turn around. The shadow had a voice. When I didn't move, the protruding metal stabbed into my neck. Turn around, kid. I did, very slowly. Behind him, my siblings still weren't moving. They were asleep. Lily was still smiling, strawberry blonde, ringlets stained red. I couldn't see Peach's face anymore. Bang! I didn't feel the gunshot. I didn't feel anything. Looking down, I glimpsed slowly spreading red blossoming like a river. It felt like being cut from strings. I hit the ground, just like my mother. My body felt heavy and wrong, paralyzed. I remember being unable to scream, unable to cry, the salty taste of metal filling my mouth. It was like being winded, rolling onto my side. All I could see was flickering candlelight. The air was thick, so hard to breathe. I rolled onto my back, trying to suck in air. The shadow took a step back, opened the front door, and bled into the night. I don't remember the pain, and I don't remember dying. I couldn't breathe, couldn't conjure words in my mouth. I felt warm and sticky, lying in my own blood. I think I tried to move, but I was so tired. I'm not sure what death feels like because it's like going to sleep. I remember my last shuddering breaths, a lulling darkness beginning to swallow me up. I don't know why I wasn't afraid. Oblivion almost felt like I was sinking into lukewarm depths on a summer's day. Oblivion wasn't pain, and there was a peaceful inevitability to it. It was endless nothing, a nothing I found myself gravitating towards, but before I could envelop myself in that darkness, it was spitting me out. The next thing I knew, I was in a white room, a slow beeping sound tearing me from slumber. I had a vague memory of slow spreading roses blossoming across my shirt, like summer flowers blooming. Everything was white, the walls, the ceilings, and my clothes. Sensation hit me in slow waves. Exhaustion. I felt it tightening its grip around my brain, dragging me back onto a mountain of pillows when I tried to jump up. My Aunt May was sitting next to me on a plastic chair, her warm fingers entangled in mine. Aunt May and Mom were practically twins, with the same thick red hair and pale skin. Mom wore her hair in a casual ponytail, while May preferred a strict bun. I had to fight back the urge to yank my hand away. Aunt May was asleep, used tissues filling her lap. There was a nurse pottering around, checking my vitals and prodding my arms. My eyes felt heavy. I had to blink several times to keep myself awake. Charlie? The nurse's voice was like wind chimes. I pretended not to notice her forced lipstick smile, the way she stood with her arms folded, staring at me like I was one of my cousin's experiment. You were in an accident, sweetie, the nurse spoke up. I could see her trembling hands. Just, try and rest, okay? I wanted to ask where my family was, but I think I already knew the answer. I think she knew that too. You died, Charlie. The nurse's voice was eerily cold. You were dead for 13 minutes. She took slow steps towards me, her eyes frowning, frenzied, like she couldn't understand me, like I was a puzzle she couldn't solve, and it was driving her crazy. I could see it in her twitching hands, her wobbling lips that were trying and failing to appear stoic. In fact, I just pulled you out of your morgue, honey. I opened up your body bag that I had just zipped up and told your aunt that you were in miracle. I just can't understand. The nurse sounded like she was trying to choke down a laugh or maybe a sob. Charlotte, you were pronounced dead at 3:02 a.m. from a gunshot wound to the chest. Taking a slow, sobering breath, the nurse tried to smile. The bullet went straight through the right ventricle of your heart and severely damaged your left lung, rendering you unable to breathe. Your heart stopped, and after 4 attempts to resuscitate, we called it. Something slimy wound its way up my throat when she began to pace the room. I did all the paperwork. It took me 2 minutes. Your death certificate was signed, and your body was taken to the morgue to be prepped for transportation. Then I had my lunch, tuna salad with protein milkshake. I'm not a fan of the chocolate flavor. She shook her head. Anyway, when I came back to you, you were awake inside your body bag. Her voice was starting to break. You were alive and asked me for apple soda. The nurse moved closer and yet kept her distance. I could feel myself moving back, panic writhing through me. So, the nurse spoke calmly. How the fuck are you still alive, Charlie? I think I passed out after that. When I woke up again, my head a lot less heavier. The nurse was gone. Slowly, my foggy brain began to find itself and connect dots. My mouth was dry, full of cotton. There was a sudden tightness, a sharp and cruel sting in my wrist. Something sharp was protruding into my flesh, and no matter how many times I violently wrenched my arm, it was stuck. It didn't feel right to be able to breathe so easily. I knew the second I woke that my mom was dead. Lily and PJ were dead, and it was like losing them all over again. As clarity came over me, I found my voice, a strangled cry escaping my lips. Get it out, I whispered in a shrill cry. Tugging at the IV in my wrist, I tried to yank the needle from my skin. Get it out, I shrieked, my blood glued to the tiny spots of blood straining the insertion point. I could see it again. So much blood. Mom was curled up on the floor, lying in slow spreading red that wouldn't stop seeping across her beaded rug. She was all over me, slick on my skin and caked in my fingernails. I couldn't wash her off me. You're okay, Charlotte. Aunt May's voice came from my right, stabling me to reality. The world started to move again, started to make sense again, and when she cupped my cheeks and told me to breathe, I opened my mouth to ask where my family were. She lightly shook her head and swallowed my words. Aunt May handed me a glass of water, and I drained it in one gulp. She told me I was a miracle. Aunt May didn't say much, and when she did, she broke into sobs. Her eyes were raw from crying, clinging on to me, her shuddery voice reassuring me that I was going to be okay. She told me I would be living with her from now on, before wrapping me into a hug and leaving me to get coffee. Once my aunt was gone, another nurse came to prod my IV. I tried to sleep, but the uncomfortable tightness of the needle sticking into my skin and the sterile white lights in my eyes made it impossible. I waited for the grief to catch up with me, drowning me into a hollow oblivion I wouldn't be able to claw myself out of. But I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel angry. I wanted to know why my family were dead. I wanted to know why I was breathing and their skin was ice cold, rotting. The sudden image of maggots crawling up my brother's nose sent me lurching into a position, my stomach heaving. I sat up, reaching for my glass of water. It was empty. The sensation of throwing up felt familiar, almost comforting. Mom was always with me when I was sick, holding my hair back and lulling my hysteria with reassuring murmurs. I was frowning at the trash can by the door, my cotton candy brain trying to figure out if I would be able to make it in time, when a small voice drifted from the doorway, startling me. I don't want you to come live with us. My cousin was peeking through the door, hiding behind a shock of dark brown curls. Jude was the only brunette in our family. The rest of us were redheads. I wasn't sure why he was dressed up like a ghost, draped in a white cloak that was way too big for him. Jude was a weird kid. His mother and my auntie had inherited the family house, so in his mind that made him superior. Jude made it clear that he didn't like his cousins refusing to play with us and banned us from family gatherings. When the adults were drinking cocktails and losing their awareness, Jude ordered us around. The times we did play with him, our cousin showed us his spider collection or the raccoon brain he kept in a jar. PJ was convinced our younger cousin was a serial killer. Several months earlier, he'd happily showed us the roadkill he had been growing bacteria on under his bed. Jude's experiments were worrying. He stuffed mushrooms down my brother's ears while he was sleeping to, and I quote, recreate The Last of Us. When Lily had a nosebleed during Thanksgiving dinner, Jude collected all her bloody tissues and refused to tell us where he'd put them and what he had done with them. Fast forward 2 months, and I found them under a nest of spiders. Jude was trying to adapt the spiders to be able to feed on human blood. I was surprised my cousin hadn't immediately demanded to see my siblings' dead bodies for autopsy. Jude stepped into the room, shuffling his feet. I'm sorry about Lily, PJ, and Aunt Ivy, he mumbled, glaring at the floor tiles. My cousin made no move to offer real sympathy, instead speaking to the floor. But I don't want you to come live with us. Jude lifted his head, looking me dead in the eye. I don't like you, Charlie. I want you to stay away. Before I could reply, he stepped back like I was diseased. You should be dead, Jude grumbled. He scowled at me, getting my age purposely wrong as usual before running off. Happy 60th birthday. I was 6 months older than him. In Jude's eyes, I was ready for retirement. Still, though, my cousin was right. I was stone cold dead, and then I was somehow alive, which was wrong. Growing up, I realized death was not so subtly attempting to fix his mistake. It started small. I'd choke on things I wasn't supposed to choke on. Chips, candy, ice cream. Aunt May had to perform the Heimlich maneuver when I choked onto a piece of chicken. I thought I was really just unlucky, but then I locked myself in a freezer that didn't have a lock and almost drowned in the local swimming pool, catching my foot in stray netting. At the summer fair, Jude convinced me to try apple bobbing, only for my head to conveniently get stuck underwater. It started to make sense. I was supposed to die with my family that night, and death was out to get me. Death started to get clever, changing his tactic. Instead of using everyday things to try to kill me, he sent reinforcements. I turned 12 years old, and my aunt threw me a huge party, inviting all my classmates. Aunt May was rich, rich. Mom never explained it, but our grandparents left everything to May. The house was like a palace, a labyrinth of floors I was yet to explore, and 2 swimming pools. I was in the kitchen cutting myself a slice of cake when out of nowhere a dead boy came rushing at me with one of the aunt's favorite kitchen knives. A dead boy who I immediately recognized. Ren Oliver. Several years prior, he'd gone missing from his parents' yard. The town launched a full investigation only to find his body in a ditch a week later. So Death had sent a foot soldier. Hiding under a hooded sweatshirt, Ren appeared older, like he had grown up with me, but there was a startling vacancy in his expression that drew the breath from my lungs, freezing me in place. Ren's death was announced as an accident, though his wounds suggested the opposite, dried blood smearing his right temple and carnon hole in his chest, his clothes painted, stained, and in bright red, glued in sticky mounds clinging to him. The boy's eyes were wild, feral, like an animal. His hair was longer, a mess of reddish curls matted to his forehead, lips split into a demented giggle. I remember taking a slow step back, my gaze glued to a knife. Ren's fingers were wrapped around the handle like he knew exactly how to use it, how to plunge it into my heart and kill me for good. He moved like a predator, zero self-awareness or recognition, only driven to kill me. The dead boy prided himself in slow, intimidating steps, shoving me against the wall and dragging the blade of the knife down the curve of my throat. His eyes confused me, writhing with hatred that was artificial, programmed into him as death's official soldier. He didn't speak, only smiled, reveling in my fear. I could tell it thrilled him, my trembling hands, my sharp, heavy breaths I couldn't control. Squeezing my eyes shut, I waited to finally die. I waited for the pain and to lose my breath once again, but death was playing with me. When I opened my eyes, the dead boy was gone, and I was on my knees, screaming. Ren Oliver is trying to kill me! I managed to hiss. My aunt knelt in front of me, her expression crumpling. Sweetie, she spoke softly, squeezing my hands. Aunt May was trying to appear calm for my sake, but I could tell she was scared, her frantic eyes searching mine. Ren Oliver is dead. The kids surrounding me started to giggle, whispering among themselves. In the corner of my eye, my cousin was leaning against the door, mid eye roll. When my aunt was ushering kids back to the pool, Jude came to crouch in front of me. Ever since I started living with him, he'd make sure to keep his distance. Keep his distance. This time, though, Jude leaned uncomfortably close, a sparkle in his eyes I'd never seen before. Inclining his head, he rocked back and forth on his heels, prodding me in the forehead. If you see the dead boy again, can you tell me? His lips curved into a smile. I did see him, I gritted out. I'm not lying. Jude shrugged. I never said you did. He lowered his voice into a whisper. I want to know when you see him again. Why? His lips curved into a smirk. So I can catch him. My cousin got closer, his breath tickling my cheek. I see dead people. After that incident, Death left me alone for a while. I was 15, walking through the forest with a friend, catching fireflies in bell jars. Aunt May was lucky to live so close to the forest. The entrance was just outside her back door. When we were littles, PJ would drag Lily and I down the trail to escape Jude's weird experiments. I decided to invite Jim Littlewood on a summer walk. Jim was a cute, but in a dorky way. He was chronically clumsy and dressed like he had been spat out of John Hughes' movie. We hiked all the way to the end of the river and had a picnic, watching the sun set over the horizon. I was having conflicting feelings for this guy. Jim was obsessed with fireflies, though he seemed more interested in photographing them than me. The guy couldn't seem to sit still, jumping to his feet to marvel at tiny specks of light dancing in the air. Going to take photos, Jim beamed, holding up his camera. I had to bite back the urge to say, Don't you have enough photos? I nodded, and he turned and sprinted back down the trail. Before his footsteps ground to a sudden halt, at first I thought he was snapping Polaroids. When I got closer, though, Blinking in the airy dark, I caught something. Bending down, I picked up a bell jar, still spilling fireflies. Further down the trail, Jim was lying crumpled in the dirt, his camera smashed to pieces next to him, blood running in thick rivulets down his temple. There he was, leaning against the tree, his arms folded, was the ghost boy. Ren Oliver was growing up with me, now a teenager, and yet his face was carved into something else entirely. More of a monster, slight points to his ears and two sharp teeth, eyes ignited. Ren didn't look like a ghost boy anymore. Death had dressed him in shackles of ivy, a crown of glass and bone forced onto his head, entangled in his curls. Death was torturing him. Ren's body was its canvas, and every time I got away, he was punished, painting his failures across scarred skin. I should have been running for my life, but I was mesmerized by each symbol cruelly carved into his neck. The boy did a slow head incline, like he couldn't believe I was standing in front of him. His slow, spreading smile caught me off guard. I remembered how to run, stumbling over my feet, but I couldn't move. The burning hatred that death had filled him with was stronger, hollowing him out completely. I managed two shaky steps before I felt him, an unearthly force winding its way around my spine. This time, he didn't hesitate. I watched his mouth move, a single curve of his upper lip that wrenched my body from my control, slamming me against the tree. There was something around my throat, choking the breath from my lungs, a thick fog spreading over my eyes. Following his mouth curving into silent letters, I could feel my feet slowly leaving the ground, my legs dangling. I was floating, hovering off of the ground, suspended by his words. Through half-lidded eyes, I caught the glint of a blade between his fists, but I couldn't move, couldn't scream. He was drowning me, bleeding into my blood, spider webbing and expanding in my brain without moving a muscle. Instead, the ghost boy stood silently, running his thumb down the teeth of his knife while he ripped my lungs apart. It was like suffocating, sinking into that peaceful oblivion I met at 8 years old. This time, though, the darkness was starving. Charlie? My eyes found daylight, a scream clawing out of my mouth. Charlie, it's past curfew! Ren flinched, his stoic expression crumpling. The dead boy's lips moved again, this time in a curse. Fuck. Charlotte! Staggering back, Ren's eyes widened and the suffocating hold on me severed. His head snapped in the direction from my aunt was coming from. Charlie, answer me right now! He hesitated, his bare feet pivoting in the dirt, like he was considering finishing me off. Ren studied me with a lazy eye, sucking on his bottom lip. When my aunt's footsteps got louder, branches snapping under her shoes, something contorted in the boy's face. Fear. I guess the boy wasn't expecting other humans to intrude. Ren fell over himself, shuffling on his hands and knees before diving to his feet. When he turned and ran, I was released, slipping to the ground, trying and failing to draw in breath. I barely felt the impact, only a dull thudding pain. I could hear the ghost boy's footsteps, his uneven, shuddery breaths, as he catapulted into a run. Under a late setting sun, I watched his dancing shadow disappear into the trees. Mission unsuccessful, I guessed. When I was fully conscious, Aunt May was checking over Jem, helping him sit up. Where did he go? I managed to get out, scanning the darkness for Ren. He's okay, just concussed, May whispered, dialing 911. My aunt applied a dressing to Jem's wound, ignoring the boy's hisses. Keep still, she murmured, smoothing his band-aid. What happened, Charlotte? She pushed me over, Jim groaned, shuffling away from me. When my aunt told him to stay calm, he straightened up, leaning against the tree. The psycho bitch tried to fucking kill me. When my aunt's gaze flickered to me, I shook my head. It was Ren Oliver, I gritted, tithering on hysteria. I couldn't tell she didn't believe me, but I couldn't stop myself. I prodded at the my throat, clawing for the indentations where his phantom fingers snaked around my neck, squeezing the breath from my lungs. But there was nothing. I could feel my mind starting to unravel. I nodded to my disgruntled classmate, trying to dodge my aunt's prodding. Ow, 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 that stings. He knocked Jem out, I managed. Then he tried to kill me. Jem surprised me with a scoff. You're seriously blaming your psychotic break on a dead kid? Aunt May pursed her lips, motioning for Jem to be quiet. Judging from her face, however, she agreed with the boy. May forced a smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. Okay, can you, describe the boy to me, Charlotte? He was wearing a crown, I said, and he looked my age. Aunt May cocked her head, and I saw real worry, like she was trying not to freak out. Jim made a snorting noise. I'm sorry, he was wearing a crown? Yes, I insisted, getting progressively more frustrated. I tried to jump up, only for my aunt to gently lower me back down. I know it sounds crazy, but death has sent Ren Oliver to kill me, just like my family. He tried to kill me when I was 12, too. Jem let out a bitter laugh. Your niece is a fucking wackadoodle. Aunt May's eyes darkened. She grabbed my shoulders, her nails stabbing into my skin. Charlie, I want you to listen to me, okay? When my eyes found the rapidly darkening sky, my aunt forced me to look at her. Charlotte! She was as scared as me, her voice shuddering. Ren Oliver is dead, my aunt said firmly, shaking me. Even then, though, I wasn't even looking at her. I was trying to find his ignited eyes lighting up the dark. Ren died at 8 years old in a terrible accident, and you can't keep using him as an excuse for your trauma. There was something twitching in her expression I was trying to make sense of. When I risked a look at Jem, the boy was staring at me dazedly, like I was really crazy. Aunt May pressed her face into my shoulders, and I could feel her tears soaking into my shirt. She was trying to hold it together, trying to understand. Charlie, I know you lost your family, she whispered, but you and Ren Oliver are not the same. You survived and he didn't. Her voice splintered. You need to come into terms with that, okay? When I didn't respond, she pinched my chin, forcing me to look at her. Charlotte! Aunt May's voice turned cold. I ignored this when you were a kid, but if you continue to use this poor boy as a coping mechanism, I will have no choice but to send you to a specialist. When Jim was taken away by paramedics, Aunt May held my hand, squeezing my fingers for dear life. I caught her gaze scanning the trees around us, delving into twisting oblivion. Every little noise sent her twisting around. She was looking for something. I'm going to get you help, Aunt May said in a low murmur when we were back at the house. Jude was sitting on the kitchen counter, legs swinging. I could feel his penetrating gaze burning into the back of my head. Aunt May set up a cocoa on the table. No more fairy tales. By the time I was 18, I had bitten 3 therapists. They refused to believe that death was coming to reclaim my soul and was using a dead boy to do his dirty work. For my 16th birthday, I braced myself to come face to face with Ren Oliver's ghost. I wasn't even in town, staying at a friend's house. But dead boys, and especially dead boys molded into death's personal soldiers, could materialize anywhere. I locked every door in the house and taped up my window. That was my friend's. Nothing happened. On my 17th birthday, I was sick in bed with gastritis. Still no ghost boy. Death seemed to have finally left me alone. On my 18th birthday, I was stuffing books in my locker when my cousin popped out of nowhere, scowling as usual. After an unexpected growth spurt and losing a ton of baby fat, my cousin had scaled the high school hierarchy, swapping his weird experiments for a varsity jacket and experimenting with his sexuality. The two of us had come to an unspoken truce. I kept quiet about his spider collection to his popular friends, and he tolerated my existence until I left for college. Your surprise party is cancelled. Jude leaned against my locker, running a hand through thick, dark hair tucked under a baseball cap. Jude never admitted it, but he was definitely embarrassed of being the odd one out. My siblings may be dead, but they were still redheads. I pulled off his cap with a smile, throwing it in his face. Sure it is. My cousin's eyes widened. He lost his sleek bravado, grabbing for his cap. Hey! According to my cousin, my party was unexpectedly cancelled every year. I wasn't sure if it was his weird superiority complex or just plain jealousy, but it was getting exhausting. Jude followed me down the hallway, matching my stride. Can you just not come home tonight? I quickened my pace. It's only a party. I'm having some friends over, and no, we won't go anywhere near your room. No, I mean, Jude stepped in front of me, and for the first time in a while, he wasn't trying to hide disdain from me. His dark eyes pinned me in place for a moment, the world around us coming to a halt. Sound bled away, and all I heard were his slow breaths. There was something, an unexplainable twitch in his eyes and lips that twisted my gut. Jude stepped closer, his lips curling. He shoved me back, losing his facade. Stay the fuck away from the house tonight, he said, and his voice, his tone, was enough to send shivers creeping down my spine. Jude had always hid behind a 10-foot wall in his mind. It was jarring to see something in him finally start to splinter. Fuck, I thought. This kid had serious mommy issues. I blinked and the world resumed, kids pushing past us. Jude seemed to have caught himself slipping back under his mask. I'm having friends over. He rolled his eyes. Your presence will win the vibe. It's my birthday? He groaned, tipping his head back. Yes, I know, but I think you can deal with the attention off of you for one night, Jude. Will Ren Oliver be there too? Jim Littlewood hollered. Jude didn't respond for a moment, his lips curling. Shut the fuck up! He spat at Jim, who immediately backed down. With an audience this time, Jude forced an award winning smile. Fine. His lips split into a grin I knew he hated. My cousin clamped his hand on my shoulder hard enough to hurt. I could feel his fingers pinching the material of my jacket. Have it your way, dude. Jude backed away with a two-fingered salute. Happy 78th birthday! In a sense, I wish I listened to my cousin. My party was a success. Sort of. Four of us, a crate of bears, and no sign of my cousin. I was mildly tipsy, sitting on the edge of the pool, dangling my legs in the water when my friend demanded more beers. I was also hungry for cake, so I stumbled inside in search of the goods. The house was dark, lit up in dazzling blue from the pool's lights reflecting through the windows. Aunt May was in her office on the ground floor, and Jude was getting high in his room. In my drunken state, I found myself marveling my aunt's house and how much of it was left unexplored. For example, in the foyer, past the spiral staircase she had custom made, was an elevator I never questioned. There was a girl my age standing on the staircase. She was frozen, mid-run, dressed in ragged jeans and t-shirt. Everything about her stuck out to me, bringing me to a sobering halt. The girl reminded me of my sister, or at least if my sister had ever grown up. I wasn't sure if I was drunk or hallucinating. Her flower crown was pretty. Lily had grown wings. I was slowly moving towards her, a sudden bang sounding from the kitchen, the bang of something shattering on the floor. Twisting around, I found myself gravitating towards warm golden light. The first thing I saw was the refrigerator door hanging open, and someone, no, something, rooting around inside it. Glued to the spot, I dazzlingly watched them grab milk, guzzling it down, and then soda, cracking open each can and sucking them dry before carving their fingers into my birthday cake. But I wasn't looking at the spillage of food seeping across the floor. Instead, my gaze found a crown of antlers, both human and animal, bone entangled with dead flowers and human remains glued to a head of familiar matted brown curls. There was something sticking from battered and bruised flesh. Twin, gaping slits sliced through a torn shirt, resembling glass wings that were not yet formed, reminding me of a butterfly. Wings, but not the wings I dreamed of as a kid. These things were unnatural mounds that did both and didn't make sense on a human boy. I could see the trauma of them slicing through his flesh. Monstrous, looming things protruding from what was left of a human spine. Human, and yet I couldn't call this beautifully grotesque face human. When Oliver had grown up with me, now as an adult, 18 years old, his clothes confused me, a single white shirt and shorts. Ren's feet were bare, battered and bruised, blood smearing my aunt's tiles. Angel. Death had turned his foot soldier and my future killer into an angel, but there was nothing angelic about the dead boy, his body and mind sculpted and molded into death's own. The boy no longer resembled a human, feral eyes and a manic smile choking down pieces of cake. His face had been contorted into a monster, gnashing teeth and sharp points in his ears, a sickly tinge to malnourished skin. And that's when it hit me, watching him stuff food with him. Something slimy itched its way up my throat. The boy couldn't move. He didn't move. I don't think he even noticed me, gorging himself on anything he could get his hands on: chicken, raw bacon, leftover salad. When he moved on to cupcakes, licking frosting from his fingers, I glimpsed markings on his arm, a language I didn't understand, carved into him. His wrists were shackled, bound in entangled iron and vine, iron that was ingrained into his skin, vines and flowers and ivy entangling his bones that were part of him, polluting his blood. Slowly, my eyes found stab wounds splitting open his torso, raw flesh where his skin had been torched, melting and then merging, ripped apart and put back together over and over again. I found his heart, the gaping cavern in his chest where it should be, and it was marked, carved, and branded with a symbol resembling an X. Ren Oliver was not dead, but just like me, he should have been. I remember saying his name, my voice slurred slightly. I didn't drink that much, but I could barely coerce words, my head spinning. Ren's neck snapped towards me, his eyes narrowing with resentment I couldn't understand, hate that seemed to puppeteer him. Slowly tilting his head, the boy's lips split into a grin, eyes filled, polluted, with mania. I could see where his lips had been stitched shut and then ripped open. He held up his hand in an awkward wave. When one of my friends stumbled into the kitchen, Ren reacted on impulse. He picked up the knife from the counter, throwing it like a dart straight through the guy's throat. Something shattered inside my mind. Ignoring my friend bleeding out, Ren stumbled over himself. Abandoning his feast, he took a single step towards me, backing me against the wall, coming so close, close enough for me to feel his very real breath grazing my cheeks. And just like when he was a kid, he traced the teeth of his blade down my throat. I wasn't expecting him to burst out laughing, trembling with hysteria. His eyes were wild, feral, and wrong, almost euphoric, with what all I could only recognize as relief. Bang! I was barely aware of the gunshot. The bullet went straight through his head, the winged boy hitting the ground, dead. I saw the blood stemming around him in a halo before the bleeding pool faltered, seeping back inside his head, like rewinding a VCR. Ren was dead, and then he was alive. Ren's body contorted, his chest inflating. His gasp for air was painful, strangled, eyes opening wide, terrified. "You fucking idiot!" Jude's voice sent me twisting around. My cousin stood in the exact same robes he wore as a child. The world tipped off kilter and I was on my knees, then my stomach. I sunk to the floor, my thoughts swimming. Jade's murmur followed me, creeping me into the dark. "I told you not to come home." I can't remember how long I was unconscious for. When I woke, I was dressed in an evening gown, a dress that used to be my mother's. My vision cleared, and I found myself sitting in an unfamiliar room resembling an abandoned swimming hall. The pool itself was empty, the bottom stained revealing scarlet. There were symbols carved into each tile, like a game. "Sit up straight, Charlotte." I was sitting at a banquet. Jude was in front of me, sipping on wine. He caught my eye for half a second before averting his gaze. At the far end of the table sat my Aunt May, kissing the rim of her glass. Her smile was twisted, I've been waiting so long to give you your birthday present, Charlotte. Your memories should be returning soon. Mom, Jude muttered, hiding behind his glass. Calm down, you're embarrassing yourself. Ignoring my cousin, May tapped her glass with a fork, and in walked my birthday presents. No, dragged by their hair. Bren Oliver, the dead boy, was in fact my aunt's prisoner. Behind him was the girl who looked so much like Lily. I think that's why my aunt chose her. Aunt May cleared her throat. For a long time, our family has lived among creatures who live in forests. You played inside. In exchange for keeping this town safe, they only ask for small favors. Wayward children who disappear into the woods are good enough payment. Charlie, you and your siblings do not share our inheritance. Your mother never wanted fey children. She wanted you to be human. Aunt May's smile faded. After losing my sister and my niece and my nephew, I made a deal to give my last surviving niece 100 years of life. Her words were white noise, my gaze glued to my birthday presents. I couldn't call them human anymore. I couldn't call Ren human when his face was so beautifully grotesque, painfully hypnotizing. The monstrous things sticking from twin slits in his back were supposed to be wings, except they looked wrong, cruelly protruding from his exposed spine. Under the influence of alcohol earlier, the girl made me smile. Her wings to me looked like one of a real fairy. In reality, they were torn and shredded apart, bigger than the girl herself. When she dropped onto her stomach, she was dragged back to her feet, her knees buckling under the weight. Her tiara of flowers and bones looked pretty to me when I saw her on the stairs. Now, though, I could see the pearly white of a human child's skull forced onto her head, dead flowers threaded through Verner's gaping eye sockets. The two of them were violently shoved into the empty pool. Jude, please demonstrate, sweetheart. Jude stood, pulling out a gun and aiming it at the winged girl. Bang! The girl's body hit the tiles, her blood seeping across stained white. Now, of course, our king did not give you life for free, May continued. The king demanded a death, as well as two heirs to join him in his court once your 100 years were complete. Her lips quivered into a smile. The king is smart. If a child cannot be stolen from the human world, they can, however, be made, molded, and shaped from their human forms, skinned of their humanity through their suffering, leaving a hollow out shell in the child's place. She was speaking so casually, ignoring Ren's whimpers. The conversation takes a while, 100 years to birth a fully blooded fey heir who will use their human memories in preparation to join their new family. Jude shot Ren in the chest, his eyes empty. This time he dropped his weapon, using finger guns instead. Bang! He deadpanned. Then the neck. I watched Ren come back to life and then die, over and over again. I think at one point he screamed and cried, but not now. He was their puppet on display, dancing for their entertainment. Half-lidded eyes drowned into oblivion found mine, and I understood this hatred before he was shot again, stabbed, branded and burned and ripped apart. At some point, I screamed at them to stop. I couldn't believe, slamming my hands over my ears and begging them. Aunt May didn't listen, ordering for my hands to be tied down. The king required two human sacrifices to suffer in your place, she concluded, for 100 years. Aunt May's smile was suddenly sad, and she lifted her glass in a toast. I was watching their blood trickle down each tile in the pool. Like every death, every time they suffered, my body became progressively less human. I felt disgusting. I wasn't supposed to be alive. Every single year of my life, every breath I had taken, was stolen. Aunt May nodded at me, her lips forming a proud smile. She stood up and was handed a sacrificial knife. Climbing into the swimming pool herself, she strode over to Ren. The boy slumped to the floor, trembling, his knees against his chest. Aunt May grabbed him by the hair, forcing his head up, and sliced the blade across his throat. His eyes flickered to me, and I swore he smiled. Spots of red dotted yellow tiles. a river trickling under my aunt's heels. Happy 7th birthday, Charlotte. Last night ended with me being locked in my room. It's been almost 15 hours, and the door is still locked. Please help me. I'm fucking terrified of what my aunt is planning. I can't stop. Fuck. If she is telling the truth, I shouldn't be here, right? And I can't stop thinking, is Ren Oliver trying to kill me or himself?